So I have a good buddy, and yeah, I've known him probably almost 20 years now, and he's truly somebody that that you would call a genius. He's incredibly sharp, and yeah, just an amazing guy, and has had an amazing career over the years. And when I first met him, I was really intrigued with how he learned because he was so smart. And I figured he was good at studying as well. So I did some modeling with him and just got really curious about how he learned and how he did the things that he did. And what was interesting was I had some assumptions about how his intelligence contributed to everything. Now, granted, he is a very, very smart guy, and I'm sure he has a quite high IQ and all that. But when I asked him about what his experience was like in school, it was a little surprising. I imagine that he would be somebody who would just get things very quickly and be on to the next thing. What I found, however, was that he was just a really ferocious studier. And we were talking about classes like math or physics, and he said that when it came to his math homework, he said he wouldn't just do the assigned homework. He said if the teacher assigned the odd number problems, he would do the odd problems, the even problems, and he would usually get one or two other books and do all those problem sets too. He wanted to know that he completely understood the topic, could do any of the questions, and really, in fact, could teach it. And he shared with me that he typically studied ahead of time. He would get his homework done ahead of time. If they gave out the question sets early, he would get everything done. And he said that when it came time to take exams, he told me one story where he said there was an exam on Monday and he was leaving the library on Friday, and everyone was just going to the library to start cramming, and people said, "Where are you going?" And he said, "Well, I know it." Like he had already internalized it, and he knew that he knew the material, and so he didn't in that case have to study on the weekend because he had already studied. But I think it's easy to look at people like this and think, oh, they're they're getting more out of their studying, but in fact, he was just doing a lot more studying. He also told me a story where he said one of his professors, when it came time for the exam, just said to him, he said, "You don't have to take the exam, you already know the material." And so that was how thoroughly he studied for things. Now, and he had this idea that he calls overlearning. Whenever he seeks to learn something, he really seeks to learn beyond that thing, so that whatever the target is, he's going to so far exceed that and see it in the larger context of the subject. And he's going to do that to an extent that he's already always prepared for whatever's coming up. Now, when I first learned this, I found it interesting. I thought, well, I have my or when I was in school, I had my kind of expectations set differently. I would struggle with things, but when I compare the amount of work that I did compared to what he was doing, it isn't even close. And I think if I had set aside the kind of hours that he devoted to these topics, I might have gotten much, much better grades. And I actually, something in me settles down when I realize just what's needed to be done to take on a particular task. I remember sitting with a client years ago, and I said that the bad news is what you're attempting is much, is much harder than you're imagining, and actually will require much more work than you're imagining. And I said, and the good news is you can do it. So what I mean by that is sometimes we may actually be underestimating the amount of work that we need to achieve something. But that's not a problem. That's just a matter. I mean, it's not a problem if we then re-estimate and set aside the correct amount of time. I think what is a challenge is if we're not up to the task. That's a bigger challenge. So I think what I mean when I've said that to clients is I think at times they're imagining a level of complexity of a task. And I realize, well, this isn't a complex task, but it is a brute force kind of task. You do have a lot of work ahead of you, and yet you can do it. It's much like, if you can do a 500 piece jigsaw puzzle, you can also do 1,000 or a couple thousand piece jigsaw puzzle. It's a much bigger task than you were imagining, and yet you know how to sit down and group pieces and connect the edges and eventually complete the puzzle. So that's one of the things that I learned from this friend, is just to actually set what I'm intending to do around a task, estimating much higher. And the beauty is when you do that, then things actually become easy because you just settle in and do the work, and then it's not a big deal. It may be a lot of hours, but the challenge is not that big of a problem. So I encourage you to try that at some point. If there's something you're facing, instead of thinking, how can I do this faster, which isn't a bad question, but I think he was asking a different question. How can I do this more thoroughly? How can I do way more than is being estimated or asked of me, and see what kind of results that leads to. And what you can do is you can do an experiment on a small task. If we're talking about math homework again, if it's one type of problem and you were planning on doing 5 examples, see, with one set do 5 examples, and with another set do 30, and see what the difference in the results is. And then you can see whether that works well for you when taking on a challenge.